Hello, my name is Mitchell Sturm, and I'm here to talk about my statistics project on the commercialized fishing industry. Now, why choose the commercialized fishing industry? Well, it is destroying the very delicate yet unyielding ecosystem known as the ocean. It's not only destroying the biodiversity of the ocean, but it's also destroying the floor, the ocean floor. It's destroying literally every single level of the ocean. The practices are causing populations of species to get decimated, and I would be willing to argue that basically every single species on the IUCN red list is on there due to some anthropogenic factor. And I would bet that almost every swimming species that is on there is affected by some kind of overfishing or bycatch. Now, the United States is doing very well in the process of making the commercialized fishing industry more sustainable. However, though, it's still not enough. My question ended up becoming, living in the New England region, I wanted to know how two regions very well known for their fishing practices and their fishing economy, how they actually differ between the two of each other. So I came up with this alternative hypothesis. The mean amount of fish caught commercially in pounds in the Pacific Northwest region will be greater than the mean amount of fish caught commercially in pounds in the New England region. So in my opinion, the Pacific Northwest is, especially places like Alaska, are known for their fishing practices. So they're going to catch more fish than the New England region. But I suspected due to some of the, because that was my initial prediction, and that's why it became my alternative hypothesis. But there's factors that led me to think that this is going to be pretty close. The Pacific Northwest has a population of 12.6 million. The New England region has a population of 14.4 million. So New England has a population much higher than the Pacific Northwest. And that's only including the states that I actually judged this on. New England being Connecticut, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New Hampshire, and Maine. Pacific Northwest being Alaska, Oregon, and Washington. Those populations are only including those states, and so I figured that this was going to be somewhat close. From in my sample, so I used the sample from 2000 to 2020, using the idea that the null hypothesis would be that New England, because of the fact that they have a higher population, would actually have more fish that they have caught, in pounds, of course. So the mean amount of fish caught commercially in pounds in the Pacific Northwest region will be less than or equal to the mean amount of fish caught commercially in pounds in the New England region. Thankfully, NOAA has a very comprehensive landings table. It's they yearly they record the amount of landings recreationally and commercially. I chose commercially only because I believe in recreational fishing practices. So getting the data was pretty easy. Their collection was done with a joint effort between the federal and state governments, and they were collected from state mandated trip tickets, landing weight out reports, federal logbooks, and fish catch. Federal logbooks of fish catch and shipboard and port site interviews. And that was per NOAA 2021. In that reference, you'll also be able to open up the link that will bring you to the actual site where I received my data from. Here are the two data tables. On the left of each data table for each region, you see the histogram. On the Pacific Northwest side, that you see there's a skewness to the right. On the New England side, you see there's a skewness to the left, and that the results were pretty staggering. So the mean of the New England region is 625 million pounds of fish caught per year. And the Pacific Northwest had a 5.73 billion pounds of fish caught as a mean per year. As you can see, that is a huge difference, an absolutely staggering difference with a pretty reasonable standard deviation. The minimum amount of fish caught was 4.46 billion in the Pacific Northwest, maximum being 65.4 billion. And then you can see the quartile markers there at the 25, 50, and 75%. Um, uh, and then here on with of course n being the population size, which was 21 for the sample size, which was 21. In the New England region, you see here that the minimum caught was 485,000 in 1 year. The maximum in 1 year was caught 748,000. And then, of course, you see the quartile percentages there. And then the same over the same period of time, 2000 to 2020, 21-year span. And with, of course, like I said, reasonable standard deviations. So below we see the information on the confidence intervals of both the Pacific Northwest and New England. Um, the What this means basically is that there's a 95% chance that the true population mean will be found between the upper and lower limits found below, where it says upper 95 mean and lower 95 mean. What this basically means is that because we chose from a sample size of 2000 to 2020, 21-year span, that's the mean that's pretty much the average that every single year it's going to be around that time, right? Around that poundage. Um, so the confidence interval is there to determine that there is a 95% chance that the true population mean, meaning that every single year the average is going to be around and within those two numbers, which really is not a huge difference. 5.47 billion compared to 5.99 billion. That's not a huge gap. The gap between the 596 million and 654 million pounds, that's not a big gap in my opinion either. So I didn't really find that there was huge gaps between this confidence interval, meaning that the true population mean is pretty slim. It's pretty much there. This data was able to show that there's a that it's going to be pretty consistent. It's not a very wide range. And then on top of that too is that the Pacific Northwest will consistently, and there is no data showing that the New England region will beat the Pacific Northwest anytime soon, unless there's of course some crazy climate problem that happens. But the data shows that New England will basically never beat out the Pacific Northwest for fishing practices. So to actually back up my last statement, we had to do, well, I ended up deciding to do a hypothesis test. So the test statistic was 40.94, which is a t-score, with a significance interval of 0.05. And then with that being said, I chose to do a right-tailed test because we're testing if the Pacific Northwest is greater than the New England region. Well, the probability score ended up being less than 0.0001, meaning that that's way less than our significance interval, meaning that we can officially reject the null hypothesis and accept the alternative hypothesis. Which brings us to the conclusion. The conclusion is that the mean amount of fish caught commercially in pounds in the Pacific Northwest region will almost always likely be greater than the amount of fish caught commercially in pounds in the New England region. There was the p-score was so small. The p-value was so small compared to that significance interval that it's basically just never going to happen. The idea of that being that there's a 5% whether there's a 5% chance of that happening is basically what that's saying, and with a probability of it being so much less than that 5%, that it basically seems like it's statistically impossible that the New England region will ever beat out the Pacific Northwest. Like I said, unless something crazy were to happen, I don't even think a population shift would really make a difference. There's not a lot of land up here. There's not a lot of area for people to move to in New England. If anything, population will shift out west, and that will just make things even crazier as far as the difference there. If that'd be something that'd be interesting to do next time. And here are my references. If you want to go ahead and check any of those out, for example, the last page is the landings. If you want to go check out the data, where I got that from. please feel free to do so. This has been my research that I've done on commercialized fishing in compared to the New England region and the Pacific Northwest. Thank you very much. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out.